Hello and welcome to episode 2 of ShakeTube 2017. Just a reminder, I am not an expert on Shakespeare. This series is supposed to be a little more loose. There are going to be fewer special effects than in my other videos, and just really more reactionary. I don't want to plot this out too much and get to the deep analysis. I just want it to be a few hot takes as I work my way through the plays of Shakespeare and discuss it with the community. So with that being said, let's look at the play for this week, Richard III. So I actually used a different edition this time around. I used the Folger Shakespeare Library edition, and in all honesty, I didn't like it as much as the edition that I had used for The Taming of the Shrew, which was the Barnes & Noble Shakespeare edition. And the reason that is because there are annotations on the side, but it's not marked in the actual text like it was with the Barnes & Noble edition, and a lot of times, because I didn't have reference as to what was getting annotated on the side, I would get to a point where I would look over and nothing would even be written there, and that happened so many times where I really didn't use a lot of those annotations overall, which became a little frustrating, but I do have both editions for a few of the plays going forward, so I'll see if that holds up, but just a recommendation for any of you out there that are looking for editions moving forward, the Barnes & Noble edition might be the way to go. But now let's dig in a little deeper. I absolutely enjoyed this more than The Taming of the Shrew, and I think something I said in the first video will hold true throughout the entirety of ShakeTube, that I will like the tragedies more than the comedies. And I don't know for sure, The Taming of the Shrew was my first comedy, but I just think that the themes that are found in tragedies and dramas are often more universal than the themes that are found in comedies. And while comedies can transcend time, a lot of the humor is of its time and place, where it will be funny to the crowds that are sitting in the globe, but when we read it anymore, we don't quite catch that humor like they did back then. But when you have themes like death, you will feel that way, way more. And with Richard III, there is the theme of power and the lengths that humans will take to get that power. The play actually reminded me of a show I've watched over the last few years, which I think props up that universal theme idea, but I totally got House of Cards vibes from this. What's funny is Kevin Spacey played Richard III in 2012, and House of Cards debuted in 2013, so maybe he got a lot of practice for Frank Underwood by being Richard III first, but either way, we definitely know Kevin Spacey has a lock on that character type. Next stop, the real presidency. Dear God, please. I was also reminded of Game of Thrones, which is no surprise there. This is happening at the time of the War of the Roses, and when you look at the influences of Game of Thrones, you start to see a lot of parallels to the War of the Roses, and there are other themes that cross over as well. There is the aspect of all of the politics that are going on, the backroom deals, and of course, the pursuit for that seat at the throne. Fun fact, Peter Dinklage also played Richard III in the mid-2000s, so if you're looking for the next big star, go to the next showing of Richard III. So this play is categorized as one of Shakespeare's historical plays, but if you look at some compilations and even the early compilations, it's also sometimes categorized as a tragedy, and I think that duality is important to look at because history may be skewed on Richard III. In fact, it definitely is. Richard was part of the House of York, which was on the losing side of the War of the Roses, obviously, and the winners, the House of Tudor, who also teamed up with the House of Lancaster, were on the winning side, and that started with Henry VII, who took the throne here at the end of the book and in the year 1485. The Tudor line reigned all the way until 1603. This play was written in the early 1590s, so you can see that that reign would have some influence over the writing of this play. You don't want to piss off the royal line, so you're not going to write the House of Tudor or the House of Lancaster in a bad light, and you don't want to have those that would be considered the rebels or whatever. You don't want to have them in a good light, so of course you're going to paint the king of that last line as almost a devilish creature. And when you get to the end where Richmond comes out to end Richard's reign, he's painted as this angelic figure, this complete good. And that's really influenced by that reign. Again, you wouldn't want to piss off the king. There is evidence that Richard killed some of the characters that he did in the play, but not all of them. So I guess that doesn't excuse it. He still probably killed some people, but for instance, him getting to the throne, There were a lot of murders that he had to commit to get there. But when you look into history, it looked like it was a legal process. It was a proclamation of Parliament that allowed him to do that because of an illegitimate child, and that changed the hierarchy of who is next in line. So I don't think that he was necessarily this all-complete evil. He was probably still a bad guy, but not quite to this degree. But that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy his depiction in the play. I thought Richard's character was amazing. At the beginning, he's plotting with you. He's kind of talking to the audience and being like, this is going down. I'm ready to take that throne. And then as he goes along, you see this descent into paranoia. And I thought that the pacing of that descent was incredible. It didn't seem like he hit peak paranoia too early. He became this terrible guy, this terrible evil guy, right when he needed to. And when Richmond came in, it was this perfect swap where, of course, you got to root for this guy. And when he becomes the king, it makes the ending of that play that much more satisfying. And there were other great characters as well. I used to do theater in high school, and I always had this feeling that the lead wasn't always the best part. Of course, it's the one that gets the most recognition, but it's so much more stressful. You have to be able to be such a dynamic actor to be able to capture the highs of the character, the lows of the character. You have to nail every scene. You have so many lines to learn. But oftentimes there is one very important character that doesn't have a lot of stage time, but comes in, does their thing to a large extent, and it affects the rest of the play. And in this play, that was definitely Queen Margaret. She just gets to come in and be like, hey, curse you all, y'all are gonna die. That would be such a fun role. You just come in for that scene, get to go out blazing. You have maybe a few lines later on, but everyone's gonna remember Queen Margaret, especially since her curse kind of was perfect. Almost everybody, if not everybody, ended up dying that she cursed. And so, of course, you're going to remember Queen Margaret, but she barely had to do any of the work. I loved the use of parallel in this play, and I thought that it was perfect with the two best scenes of dialogue. The first one being with Richard and Lady Anne, and the second one being with Richard and Queen Elizabeth. And both times you see Richard going back and forth, having these pun-offs with both Lady Anne and Queen Elizabeth, but in the case with Lady Anne earlier on in the play, he seems more on top of his game when he's trying to woo her, and sometimes it even seems like he's being pretty persuasive and winning, even though she thinks he's a terrible person. But by the time you get to that same type of dialogue with Queen Elizabeth, he's starting to become, like I said, really paranoid and crazy, and it seems like he doesn't quite have that control, and Queen Elizabeth kills it. Every time he has anything to say, she perfectly counters it, and that parallel made both of those scenes even better. Then there's the scene with the ghosts of everybody that Richard had slain. It was perfect how they would go to Richard and just totally stomp him in the dirt, diss him, say, I hope you die tomorrow, and then go over to Richmond and give him all these compliments and blessings. And I just know for a fact the Globe would be going nuts. If you know anything about that theater, it was really rowdy. There were all types of people that ended up going to see those plays, and they were allowed to be a big ruckus crowd. And I can just imagine every time those ghosts are over there dissing Richard, everybody's just out there going, oh! And then finally you have a really great parallel scene at the end with Richard and Richmond's speeches when they're trying to rally their troops before that final battle. Richmond is very eloquent. He's using a lot of spiritual imagery. He is really inspirational, and he seems like a kind-hearted soul. And then you get over to Richard, and he's just talking all this crap on everybody. He's throwing these disses left and right. He just does seem like he's a crazy guy, and you can't imagine anybody following him with confidence into battle. Because of those speeches, when Richmond becomes Henry VII at the end, again, it's all the more satisfying because they had that great parallel structure to lead him into that role. I just thought this was a fantastic play. I'm glad that I got the opportunity to read this because of ShakeTube, and the thing is it really got me researching. I didn't really know that much about the War of the Roses. It was something that I had heard about in the past, knew that I'd be interested in it, but I'd never taken the jump to actually look up any specific events or any of the specific people that were a part of that war and the era that surrounds that. But because I was reading this, I was finding myself getting online and I honestly think that after I set this play aside and go on to the next one, I'll still be doing that research and I'll still be really invested in this time period. And so to me, again, that just makes this play a great success. But I can't dwell on it too long. I have 13 more plays to go, and next week we will be looking at Romeo and Juliet. So if you've been following along ShakeTube so far and you want to jump in, I think this would be a perfect place to do it. Obviously, Romeo and Juliet is one of Shakespeare's more well-known works, and you probably know a lot of the main plot lines already. So if you've been interested, I invite you right here and now to do ShakeTube 2017. And that about wraps it up. I hope the rest of you had a great reading experience with Richard III, and I will see you next week for the next video of ShakeTube.